There's no denying that the Fantastic Four franchise has been a dumpster fire in Hollywood.
Say that again?
To the utter disaster that was the Fantastic Four 2015 movie, we've seen one of Marvel's most iconic families get butchered on the big screen time and time again. The 2015 reboot, in particular, was a colossal failure, nothing short of a cinematic catastrophe. The 2005 and 2007 movies, while fun in some ways, failed to capture the true essence of the team and their adventures, often leaning too much on humor and spectacle at the cost of character depth. I have a soft spot for the 2005 and 2007 movies, mainly because they were some of the first superhero movies I watched as a kid, so there's a lot of nostalgia attached to them. They're still among my first experiences with the superhero genre, but as much as I look back on them fondly, they still left a lot to be desired. So the question is, can Fantastic Four First Steps be the movie that finally gets it right? Well, in this video, we're gonna tear into the previous films, expose their flaws, and explain how First Steps has the chance to fix everything that's been broken. Let's start with the script and characterization, because that's the backbone of any superhero film. The Fantastic Four films have had a major problem in this department. Starting with 2005's Fantastic Four, the film lacked depth and didn't properly explore the complexities of the characters. Reed Richards was portrayed as a one-dimensional genius character whose arc never fully took off. The same can be said about the rest of the team. In a scene where Reed is first revealed to be capable of stretching, he seems to be shocked by it, but not really to the degree that you would expect a normal person to react.
That's gross.
Which makes it hard for the audience to care. There's a real lack of emotional connection in the script, and the character motivations aren't strong enough to drive the story. In Rise of the Silver Surfer, we see more of the same, except this time the script is a step backwards. Johnny Storm, who had been fun and tolerable in the first film as a cocky one-liner spouting member of the team, becomes unbearable in this sequel. His character devolves into more of an annoying, shallow version of himself. The shift may be funny to some, but it ultimately stunned his growth as a character. Then there's the 2015 disaster. This film had an even worse time with characterization and writing than the previous two films. The 2015 Fantastic Four was a complete wreck. The pacing was completely off, and the character development, basically it wasn't even existent. Take Reed Richards for example. He starts as an ambitious young scientist, and somehow within minutes of gaining his powers, he's not the same person at all. It feels like the film's transition from one stage of the character's development to the next happens in the blink of an eye, with no explanation or build-up. He's completely unrecognizable by the end. In 2015, the team's dynamic was practically non-existent. There was no real chemistry, the relationship between the characters felt forced. The movie has a strange, almost robotic approach to interactions between Reed, Sue, Johnny, and Ben. It's like they were all strangers thrown together by the circumstances, instead of a family that grew together over time. Ben Grimm's transformation into the Thing is another wasted opportunity. Instead of an emotionally charged moment, the scene felt more like an afterthought, and it lacked the weight that it should have had. However, there was a scene in the movie that almost executed the emotional weight of Ben Grimm's transformation perfectly. I'm talking about when Reed Richards is in the vents and he sees Ben Grimm basically as a giant moving boulder. That scene almost executed it properly, but it only lasted for a couple seconds, whereas if it lasted for an emotional beat, it would have been way more impactful.
Shit! Ben, I'm coming back for you, I promise! No, Reed, help me! Please don't leave me! I'm sorry!
Fantastic Four First Step seems to be addressing these issues though. From the trailer we see Reed Richards is going through stages of his genius. We're probably going to see him struggling with his newfound abilities and forming relationships. The team dynamic of the Fantastic Four is key here, and it looks like the film put effort into showing these characters develop into the close-knit family they're meant to be. First Step seems to recognize that the team should feel more like a family, not just a collection of superpowers with a common goal. Now let's talk about villains. And I know what you're thinking, Dr. Doom is not in the First Steps trailer. I know, but before you freak out, hear me out. In the Fantastic Four movies, Doom has been treated more like an afterthought. The 2005 movie introduced him as a rich, powerful businessman with superpowers, but the characterization was weak and superficial. Dr. Doom isn't just some villain. You don't get to give him an origin story as genetic as Fantastic Four 2005. In the 2005 film, Doom's power felt more like a random plot device than the result of his genius and ruthlessness. And even worse, Rise of the Silver Surfer did Doom dirty by turning him into a secondary antagonist, in my opinion barely holding any real presence. But let's not forget the 2015 Fantastic Four. Oh my god.
Oh god.
This version of Dr. Doom was an embarrassment. The film took the iconic villain and turned him into a disjointed, borderline nonsensical character who felt more like an angry hacker than a world-dominating genius. His motives were muddled at best, his powers didn't make any sense, and by the end he was just another CGI mess that felt completely disconnected from everything the Fantastic Four was about. The film went for a darker, more gritty interpretation of Doom, but it completely missed the mark. Instead of the brilliant, power-hungry tyrant we all know from the comics, we got some incoherent villain who was barely even developed. The movie tried to rush his transformation into Doctor Doom, but the result felt more like what I said earlier, an afterthought, than a carefully constructed arc. But here's the interesting part. First Steps isn't giving us Doom right away. Instead, it teases Galactus. Yeah, that's right, Galactus. This is a chance to redeem the terrible treatment of the character in Rise of the Silver Surfer. If Marvel handles him properly, we could finally see Galactus as a cosmic force the way he was always meant to be. Something that can actually challenge the Fantastic Four. With a proper build-up, Galactus could finally be treated as the world-devouring entity that can bring real stakes to the story. And by introducing Galactus as the villain, the film has the opportunity to give us a truly menacing presence, something that the Fantastic Four franchise has needed for years. Production issues have been a consistent problem for the Fantastic Four movies. The 2005 movie was plagued with a rushed production and studio interference, driving the film to focus more on a lighter-hearted, more comedic tone. There's an awkward vibe throughout the entire movie, where the tone of the film shifts erratically between humor and high-stake action. Then, Rise of the Silver Surfer followed suit with its own set of production problems. While it had a decent visual style, the plot was incredibly rushed, and the movie felt more like it was slapped together in a hurry to capitalize off the success of the first film, which for the record was successful. The relationship between the characters felt barely explored, and the film failed to deliver on anything fresh or exciting. The film ultimately felt like a cash grab, with no heart. Finally, the 2015 reboot was a mess from start to finish. We all know the horror stories surrounding this movie, the endless reshoots, the director's creative differences with the studio, and the overall disjointed feel of the final product. From the very beginning, it was clear that no one was really in charge, and we could tell because the movie suffered for it. The character arcs were rushed, the pacing was awful, and the entire production felt like a desperate attempt to fit in with the dark trend of superhero films at the time. Instead of capturing the heart and the humor of the Fantastic Four family, the film went for a very dark tone that completely undermined the spirit of the characters. The team never really feels like a team, which is one of the core elements that made the comic so beloved. There's no chemistry. In fact, the group's interactions are so awkward that you almost even start to wonder if they even like each other. The movie's attempt to make the Fantastic Four feel gritty just came off as hollow, like it was trying to mimic films like The Dark Knight without understanding what made those films work. First Steps, on the other hand, looks like it's taken time to get things right. Marvel Studios has a reputation for sometimes studio interfering, but other times supporting directors and allowing them to craft their vision while keeping a cohesive, high-quality product. From the trailer, it's clear that the film is going to be more grounded and deliberate with its approach. There's something about the pacing that feels more thoughtful. First Step seems to have avoided the rushed production of past Fantastic Four films, and that's a good sign that the film will have the right balance of character development, action, and storytelling. In the 2005 Fantastic Four, the film struggled with finding a middle ground between its attempts at humor and more serious emotional moments. The tones of the film whiplashes, and that makes the film feel disconnected. The pacing was seemingly uneven, with the film dragging its feet throughout the origin story. Rise of the Silver Surfer doesn't fare much better either. The pacing at times feels too fast, and the film spends little time on character development before thrusting the team into the final conflict. While the Silver Surfer himself is a visually striking presence, it would have been nice if the film explored his tragic backstory in a more meaningful way, pushing the narrative into rapid-fire action without the necessary emotional beats. Then there's Fantastic Four 2015, where the pacing was an outright disaster. It's slow, almost lethargic, as the film spends the majority of its runtime establishing the team's origins, but nothing of significance happens until the final act. And even then, the action feels rushed. It's basically the movie's first all-out action scene, and the film's darker tone leaves little room for any fun or engagement. The pacing just drags and it suffocates the film, making it a chore to sit through, and the balance between the plot's serious tone and the team's dynamics never sticks. First Steps hopefully will take its time, making sure the team's emotional arcs and their journey to become heroes are treated with the seriousness they deserve while allowing space for humor. The trailer shows a grounded approach that doesn't rush the character development, offering a pacing that lets relationship and individual struggles breathe before ramming into the action. This could be the first Fantastic Four film that nails the balance between drama and levity. In 2005's Fantastic Four film, we didn't see enough character growth. Johnny Storm, for example, remained the same wisecracking, reckless figure throughout the movie, and his redemption arc, if it even existed, was shallow at best. The same can be said for Rise of the Silver Surfer. While it tried to present more stakes with the arrival of a cosmic entity like Galactus, it did so without giving the team enough screen time to deal with the implications of their powers and their growth within their relationships. Sue and Reed's relationship barely changes, Johnny and Ben's dynamic only develops a little bit. All this leads us to believe that the characters are in a constant state of never evolving. And of course, the 2015 reboot was a worse offender. It introduced new, younger versions of the team, but gave them little time to develop into the heroes they were meant to be. The film's treatment of Reed Richards in particular was rushed. One minute he's a teenage genius, and the next, He's rushed into the leadership role with little explanation of how he got there emotionally. The entire middle section of the film is slow, with characters doing very little to evolve as they adapt to their powers. Victor Von Doom's villainy is almost entirely neglected, and he becomes nothing more than just another afterthought, rushing toward the final battle with no real arc to speak of. First Step seems to be taking more of a patient approach. The trailer emphasizes internal struggles with each character and what they're facing in the wake of their powers, and there's a clear focus on their emotional development. It seems like Reed is going to have tension with his leadership role. Of course, Ben Grimm is going to have unease with his new body, and we're probably going to see much more through further exploration of each character's growth. By taking the time to build these stories, it seems like First Steps is promising to provide the much needed character depth that the past films never delivered on. In the 2005 film, while it of course was a product of its time, it had some jarring visual effects moments. For example, Ben Grimm, despite being the most important visual transformation of the team, looked more like a man in a rubber suit, lacking the emotional weight needed for the character. Reed stretching sometimes looked awkward. There were times where these issues made the character's powers feel less believable and took away from the immersion. Rise of the Silver Surfer had moments of brilliance though. The Silver Surfer's effects were stunning, giving him the fluidity the character deserves. But Galactus? Oof. One of Marvel's most iconic villains, he was reduced to a cosmic cloud, a huge disappointment for the fans. I mean, not for me, I was like 6 or 7 at the time, but the older I got, the more I started to see that this was not a good interpretation of the character. Rather than presenting him as the massive, imposing figure the fans know him as in the comics, the film treated him as little more than a background threat. The 2015 film, however, took a different approach, but in some aspects it still failed with its visual effects. Reed Richards stretching still kind of had the same problems that the previous films had, and the final battle with Dr. Doom was just a blur of rushed CGI that lacked both impact and clarity. Dr. Doom's transformation into the metallic villain we know from the comics looked more like a last-minute decision rather than a carefully constructed visual effect. It felt like the film was trying to hide its lack of substance behind poor CGI, rather than creating something memorable. The visual effects of First Steps are a major improvement. The Thing looks more like a fully realized tragic hero rather than a man in a rubber suit. However, one thing that we all noticed from the trailer is that we didn't see Reed Richards' powers in full action. This could be for a number of reasons. Maybe they're saving it for later, or it could be that they're trying to perfect it before showing it off. Whatever the reason is, it's a sign that they're taking the time to make sure that it looks right. Now let's be real, Marvel's recent track record with CGI has been a bit of a mixed bag. We all know we've seen some major missteps in their recent films as far as visual effects go in the MCU. But from what we've seen in this trailer, there's some hope that they finally changed. The quality of the visual effects look impressive. It might just be the film that can break the trend and deliver top-tier visual effects across the board. Let's just hope that Reed Richards' stretching will be just as smooth and believable as the rest of their powers. So where does this leave us? The Fantastic Four franchise has been a series of failures, from lackluster scripts to underwhelming villains, all the way to disastrous behind-the-scenes drama. But Fantastic Four First Steps looks like it has the potential to fix all of that, with a focus on deeper characterization and a more menacing Dr. Doom. Well, my bad, Galactus. A villain finally being handled the right way. And with a much needed break from studio interference, First Steps finally has the chance to get the Fantastic Four right. It's been a long road, but if the trailer is anything to go by, we're in for something special. Fingers crossed that this is the beginning of a new era for Marvel's first family. Thank you all for watching. As you can see, I only have 1,000 subscribers, so if you really like this video, please subscribe and hit the like button because I have more content like this coming. And thank you for watching.